All right, everybody, get ready, because today we're diving into something you guys specifically requested, those sneaky little gastos hormiga.
Gastos hormiga.
Yeah. Directly translated, it means ant expenses, and they can really eat away at your savings.
Like ants.
Exactly. They're those small, almost invisible expenses that we often overlook. But just like ants carrying crumbs, they can carry away surprising amounts of money over time.
Ah, I see. Interesting. So where did you learn about these ant expenses?
Well, we found this fascinating Spanish podcast, and the way they explained it, they start with this woman, Laura, who gets hit with a totally unexpected medical bill. She's like, wait, where did all my money go?
I've been there. You think you're doing okay, then bam, blindsided by some hidden expense. It's like those small, often unnoticed expenses can really drain your account without you even realizing it. It's like a leaky faucet, a slow, steady drip that becomes a big problem over time.
That's such a good analogy. And yeah, the podcast uses a bunch of relatable examples too. They talk about this woman, Camilla, who spends $3 on a large coffee every single workday. Doesn't seem like much, right?
$3? Well, it adds up. If she's spending $3 a day, 5 days a week, that's $15 a week. Over a year, that's $780 just on coffee. It's like our brains don't want to do that math. Those small, frequent purchases, they don't seem like a big deal.
Seriously. Our brains are like, nah, it's fine. It's just $3. But the podcast also talks about Claudio, who's constantly running to the store for snacks, spending like $2 here and $3 there.
Oh, yeah. Multiple trips to the store really add up.
Exactly. And it's those little trips that can really get you.
That's what it all comes down to. It's like we underestimate the cumulative impact of those small purchases. The daily coffee, grabbing a snack at the checkout, those seemingly harmless trips to the store. They really impact our budgets in the long run.
It's making me sweat thinking about all the times I've done that. So how do we stop it? How do we stop these sneaky ant expenses from draining our bank accounts?
So the podcast breaks down some of those common ant expense culprits. They call them the usual suspects. And let me tell you, they're sneaky.
Oh, they can be very sneaky. They trick you into thinking they're necessities or little treats you deserve, but really, they're little money suckers. Totally. And first up, those impulse buys, especially at the supermarket checkout. You know, those tempting displays strategically placed while you're waiting in line.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean. It's like they're designed to make you spend more. But the key is to go in with a plan, a shopping list. Stick to it like glue.
It's true. Having that list really helps me resist those tempting displays.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to just walk away from them. Seriously, picture yourself saying no to those impulse buys and yes to your financial goals.
I love that visualization, like a mental stop right there.
Exactly.
Okay, next up, drinks. Gotta admit, this one hits close to home for me.
Oh, yeah. Drinks can really add up. Remember Camila from the podcast with her $780 coffee habit?
Oof, yeah. I'm definitely guilty of that sometimes.
It's so easy to forget how those daily coffees or those after-work drinks add up. The key is just being mindful.
Right. It's not about depriving yourself, just being aware of how those small purchases contribute to your spending.
Exactly. Could you maybe set a budget for those indulgences? Or even just find ways to enjoy them less frequently?
Less frequently.
Like what? Well, maybe try brewing your own coffee at home a couple of times a week. Or explore some fun mocktail recipes for after work.
Those are really good ideas. All right, next on the list, snacks and sweets. The podcast talked about how these can become major ant expenses.
Oh, for sure. Especially if you're someone who loves to snack throughout the day. You know, you've got your snack drawer at work, your pantry full of goodies at home.
Totally. The podcast gave that great example of Claudio always making those quick trips to the store for snacks.
And those trips add up.
Right. They really recommended meal prepping as a good way to combat this.
Meal prepping is a game changer. If you've got healthy snacks and meals prepped and ready to go, you're way less likely to grab those impulse snacks.
So true. Plus, you're eating healthier overall.
Exactly. It's a win-win, good for your wallet and good for your health.
Okay, now for the big one. Eating out. I'll admit, this is a budget buster for me.
Yeah, I think we've all been there. Remember Anna from the podcast? She was shocked to see just how much she was spending at restaurants each month.
Totally get it.
And you know, the podcast was really big on emphasizing cooking at home more often.
Yeah, they really drove that point home.
And for good reason, it's almost always cheaper to cook at home.
For sure. Plus, you have so much more control over the ingredients, the portion sizes.
Absolutely. And let's not forget about those hidden costs of eating out, like tipping and delivery fees.
Ugh, don't even get me started on delivery fees. Okay, moving on to something a bit more sensitive vices. The podcast focused a lot on smoking and alcohol.
Right. They can really impact not just your wallet, but also your health.
Absolutely. They told this really interesting story about a woman named Andrea who was shocked to realize how much she was spending on cigarettes every year.
It was a huge wake-up call for her.
Totally. But even if you don't want to quit completely, the podcast made a great point that just cutting back can make a big difference.
Absolutely. Even small changes can lead to big wins. Okay, let's move on to another big one in today's world, streaming services.
Oh, yeah. There's so many.
So many. And it's so easy to subscribe to everything. But, the podcast really encouraged people to be honest about what they're actually watching.
Good point. I'm definitely guilty of subscribing to services I barely use.
Right. It's so easy to fall into that trap of subscription creep.
Yeah,
And before you know it, you're spending a fortune on things you don't even use.
it's true. So are you saying we should just cancel all our streaming services?
Well, not necessarily,
Oh.
but it's about being mindful, right? Could you maybe rotate your subscriptions? Like have one or two at a time and then switch them up when you've watched everything you want.
That's actually a really good idea. I never thought about it like that before.
It's all about finding what works for you and your budget.
I like it. So we've covered impulse buys, drinks, snacks, eating out vices, and streaming services. What else is there? Okay, so besides impulse buys, drinks, snacks, eating out vices, and streaming services, what other sneaky ant expenses are lurking out there?
Well, don't forget about those pesky bank fees. Those can really add up without you even realizing it.
Oh, tell me about it. It's like they just appear out of nowhere on my statement.
Right, like those random ATM fees or those little charges for bank transfers. It's crazy.
Ugh, yes. And those late payment fees on credit cards, those can really get you if you're not careful.
It's true. And the worst part is, a lot of times those fees can be avoided altogether.
Oh, for real? How do you avoid them?
Well, a lot of it comes down to just being informed. Read the fine print, Do you even know what you're being charged for?
Good point. I definitely don't always read the fine print.
And, there are often ways around those charges, like using in-network ATMs or looking into online banking options. Those can save you a lot in fees over time.
Good to know. I'm definitely going to be more mindful of those bank fees from now on.
Yeah.
So what else is there? What about transportation costs? Those seem like they could harbor some ant expenses.
Totally. Think about even just owning a car. You've got gas, maintenance, insurance, tolls. They all add up so fast.
True. And taxis. I've definitely spent way too much on taxis in my life.
It's so easy to do, especially when you're in a rush and not thinking straight. But, it's worth exploring other options whenever you can. Could you walk or bike instead sometimes?
Yeah, I guess I could. It's just hard to break those old habits sometimes.
I know it takes effort, but even if you can make small changes to your transportation habits, it can make a real difference in the long run.
Okay, that's a good point. Small changes, big impact.
Mhm.
Speaking of small changes, remember how the podcast talked about phone recharges? I thought that was interesting.
Phone recharges? Oh yeah, those little top-ups can really get you.
Right. Those tiny charges add up so fast, and it's easy to lose track.
Absolutely. It's like you're constantly feeding a little money monster. But, one thing the podcast suggested that I thought was clever was instead of those little top-ups here and there, consider just going with a monthly plan.
That's a good idea. I feel like having that set monthly amount would make me much more conscious of my usage, too.
Exactly. It gives you more control, more predictability over your spending.
I like it.
It's all about those little shifts in mindset.
This has been so eye-opening. We've uncovered so many sneaky ant expenses lurking in our everyday lives.
They're everywhere. But, the good news is now that you're aware of them, you can start to take control.
So true.
Yeah.
But it's not about completely depriving ourselves or trying to pinch every penny, right?
Exactly. The podcast made that really clear. It's not about becoming a Scrooge. It's about awareness, right? It's about making conscious choices with your money.
Right. And remembering that even those tiny expenses can add up over time. So what can our listeners do to start taking control?
Well, remember how we talked about those different categories? Well, pick one that really resonated with you. Maybe it's those impulse buys. Maybe it's your daily coffee habit, whatever feels most relevant to your life. And then for the next week, just track your spending in that area.
Great idea. Track your spending just for 1 week.
You might be surprised what you discover about your own habits.
We hope you'll join us for the next deep dive, where we'll be tackling a whole new topic. Until then, happy saving, everyone.